So as you might have already guessed, we can also use lists to hold text data, and 2D lists are just the same. We can add text data to these 2D lists using a lot of the same functions. So let's go ahead and let's start with letter. Let's just call it letters list, and I'm going to set it equal to an empty list, and then I'm just going to letters list append, and let's go with A, B, C, and we'll do D on that, and I want to put it into a list. So hopefully we know how this works now, and I'm appending a list into position 0 of letters list, and it just contains string characters instead of numbers. And I can also, let's add a couple more. Now we have kind of a full-fledged 2D list there. So then I can say, let's go ahead and label our work. List with letters, and then I'll use an enhanced loop to print it out. And I'll set output equal to empty string, and I'll create in letters, I'll do an inner loop, and I'll add letter to the output, and then I'll also add a tab there, and then I'll print output. Gonna do it. And so let's try and let's work that out. So I did that, and I have my letters list there, and let's go ahead and add a new line character to that to sort of differentiate. So we have a list. So there's my list of letters, and it got printed out in a 2D grid using the nested loop. And I'm basically appending it like that. However, there is a potentially more efficient way to add values to your list. So let's go ahead. I'm going to print a label for my work here. And I'll say here is a list of words using split. So we're going to use the split function to add values into our 2D array from an array. So let's create a new words list. So a list called words list, and it's just going to be an empty list for now. I also need a variable for a string. And instead of appending like this, which is kind of a hassle, I can say do this guy, and I can add an entire string like this. Then I can create a split list, and I can say go.split, and I'm going to delimit by a space. So each one of these words, so split list is a new list, and each one of these words by itself gets its own slot in split list because I'm delimiting by the space. So it'll skip the space and use that as a new word character. So every time it sees a space, it goes, okay, I'm making a new slot in the array based on the space. So now I can print sp list, and if I drag it over here, you can see I have all 12 of those words inside the list. So now I need a 2D for loop or a nested for loop to add the values from SPList into my 2D array. So I'm going to start with for I in range, and since I have 12 values, I'm going to make the vertical columns, I'm going to make those 3. So I'll go from 0 to 3, or actually 0 to 2. And then I'm going to say for j in range, and I'm going to go 0 to 3. So now I have my for loop, and then inside the outer loop, so since this is words list that I'm adding stuff to, words list is of right now an empty list. So I can't even add anything at I here. I'm just going to have to append a new index inside here. So I'm going to create a new list of words in the words list, and it's going to start out as being empty, and the inner loop's job is to fill up this new position that I've just appended. So now I'm going to, now that words list at I exists because this brought it into existence, now that that exists, I can append a new value into it. So the trick is, how do I append a value from here into my words list? The way we do that is we're going to use a variable that I'm going to call spot, and this is going to hold the spot where I am in the split list. So if I go, this is spot 0, this is spot 1, this is spot 2, this is spot 3, this is spot 4 in split list or SP list. So this keeps track of where we are in SP list. So I'm going to append SP list at I, or at spot, to words list at I. And then once I do that, I've already used the word at this position. So if I'm starting at 0, I've already used that spot 0. So I want to skip to the next one. So if I'm adding it, I'm going to add one to spot so that I skip to the next index. That way, once I use father, I move on to mother, and then once I'm done with mother, I move on to eagle, and so on and so forth. So that's what that's for. The other thing, so now that should fill up our array just fine. The only problem now is I want to print it out. And before, what we were doing, if you look up here, we use separate, we're using a separate for loop to print, but we actually don't have to do that. I could actually just put my output inside the outer loop, just like I did with the other things, but in a separate nested loop. I don't have to separate. I can just put it in the outer loop that I already have, and then I can add words list at I. Now that I've created words list at I and appended the appropriate value into it, I could add words list at position I, j to the output, because that actually now exists. I'm going into words I and I'm appending j, the position j, into the list. So now I have words list at ij, and I can just add it onto the output. And I'll also add like a tab in here to make things look nice, and add one to my spot. And then in here, I'm going to just print output. And we'll see how that goes. And let's just get everything organized in here in case we need to do any troubleshooting. I'm going to space some stuff out. And that way we can get a good look at things. I'll print that output. And let's go ahead and give it a test run. And just like I thought, this one's not too difficult though. I just forgot to put parentheses around the append statement. So then, if you see, I'm printing my output, and there's all 12 of my words. They're not perfectly lined up, but I'm sure you can use some print formatting or something like that to get those to line up properly together. But you can see how it works. So here, where I have words list at IJ, I could just have this, and I'll use some print formatting. Let's see. Let's give it 15. I gotta put these in quotes. Let's go dot format. Words listed IJ. And if I run that, you can see that all 12 of my words line up pretty well together here. And maybe if I took this, probably take it down to 10. Let's try that, and you can see that they line up pretty good. And let's label our work. And we'll run it one more time. Let's put a new line there. Make sure we can refer back to that later. And that's how we do grids with strings and appending list. So this is like a multi-purpose 2D for loop where I'm actually adding things to the list and appending the list, and at the same time adding to the output and printing out.